Consequences for freedom of speech and expression in the wake of the Christchurch massacre continue to be felt as Facebook moves to ban several Canadian groups and individuals from its platform. Not sure where this roller coaster is going to take us next? You're not alone. I'm your host, B.A. Jarvis, and you are watching The Golden Door. Alright, we're back, and not too soon, as the road to hell continues to be paved with a mortar of ignorance and stupidity, as governments and corporations around the world rush to fulfill the Christchurch shooter's manifesto's stated intentions almost word for word. On March 27th, Facebook announced its decision to treat content it views as white nationalism and white separatism the same as white supremacist content, evoking a unilateral ban and directing anyone who attempts to search for or post content associated with these ideologies to a nonprofit that helps individuals leave hate groups. Facebook was initially reluctant to make the move, citing concerns that it could affect other groups advocating for similar positions such as black separatism, Zionism, and the Basque movement. However, after months of consultation with academics and advocacy groups and one major hate crime in the Southern Hemisphere, Facebook has decided to proceed and remove any separation between the concepts going forward. As reported by the CBC, Facebook extending ban on hate speech to white nationalism, white separatism. Change comes 2 weeks after massacre in New Zealand that was aired live on Facebook. Facebook is extending its ban on hate speech to prohibit the promotion and support of white nationalism and white separatism. The company previously allowed such material even though it had long banned white supremacists. The social network said Wednesday that it didn't apply the ban previously to expressions of white nationalism because it linked such expressions with broader concepts of nationalism and separatism, such as American pride or Basque separatism, which are still allowed. But civil rights groups and academics call this view misguided and have long pressured the company to change its stance. Facebook said it concluded after months of conversations with them that white nationalism and separatism cannot be meaningfully separated from white supremacy and organized hate groups. Critics have raised these issues with the highest levels of Facebook and held a number of working meetings with their staff, as we've tried to get them to the right place, said Kristen Clark, President and Executive Director of Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, a Washington, D.C.-based legal advocacy group. This is long overdue as the company continues to deal with the grip of hatred and the increase in white violent supremacy, she said. The article continues. Rashad Robinson, the president of Color of Change, said the racial justice group warned Facebook to the growing dangers of white nationalists on his platform years ago, and that he was glad to see Wednesday's announcement. Facebook's update should move Twitter, YouTube, and Amazon to act urgently to stem the growth of white nationalist ideologies, which find space on platforms to spread the violent ideas and rhetoric that inspired the tragic attacks witnessed in Charlottesville, Pittsburgh, and now Christchurch, he said. Twitter does not currently ban white nationalists and white supremacists, although its hateful conduct policy forbids the promotion of white violence or threats against people on the basis of race, gender, religion, or other protected categories. It also bans the use of hateful images or symbols in profile or header images. YouTube also bans hate speech, but says it removes content promoting violence or hatred on the basis of these categories. Amazon has an offensive products policy that does not allow the promotion or glorification of hatred, racial violence, or sexual or religious intolerance. The three companies did not immediately respond to messages for comment on Wednesday. Medea Ahussein, a special counsel for anti-Muslim bigotry at the nonprofit Muslim Advocate, said what's needed now is more information on how Facebook will define white nationalist content and how it will enforce its new rules. Now the question is, how will Facebook interpret and enforce this new policy to prevent another tragedy like the Christchurch mosque attacks, she said. Well, she didn't have to wait long for an answer. As reported on April 8th on CBC, Facebook bans Faith Goldy and dangerous alt-right groups. Social media giant says platform can't be used to spread hate. Facebook is banning alt-right political commentator Faith Goldy, white nationalist crusader Kevin Gordeau, and various extremist groups, the social media company said Monday. The company has said it has long-standing policies on extremist content and organized hate groups and is barring the individuals on organizations under its Dangerous Individuals and Organizations Community Standards policy. Goldy's views have been described as far-right white nationalist. She was fired from Rebel Media in 2017 after taking part in a neo-Nazi podcast. Individuals and organizations who spread hate, attack, or call for the exclusion of others on the basis of who they are have no place on Facebook. That's why we have a policy on dangerous individuals and organizations, which state that we do not allow those who are engaged in offline, organized hate to have a presence on Facebook, reads the statement from Facebook. The individuals and organizations we have banned today violate this policy, and they will no longer be allowed a presence on our services. Our work against organized hate is ongoing, and we will continue to review individuals, pages, groups, and content against our community standards. Facebook said that the Canadian Nationalist Front, Aryan Strike Force, Wolves of Odin, and Soldiers of Odin, also known as Canadian Infidels, have also been banned from having further presence on its services. The company said it also intends to remove content affiliated with those banned, including linked pages and groups. The pages began to disappear from Facebook this morning. Facebook works with various academics and organizations around the world to determine which ones are hate organizations. Asked by CBC News for her reaction, Goldy sent an email citing her statement on Twitter about being banished from Facebook and Instagram. Quote, "Our enemies are weak and terrified. They forget most revolutions were waged before social media," she tweeted. CBC News contacted Twitter to ask if Goldy would be banned on that platform, but received a terse no comment in reply. Last week, Goldy tweeted that she'd been barred from the Airbnb home sharing service. Edmonton-based freelance journalist Bashir Mohammed, and astute observers may remember Mr. Mohammed from a previous video on race-baiting journalism, which I encourage you to check out if you haven't watched, who writes about white supremacy and the Ku Klux Klan in Canada, applauds Facebook move, but said he wishes it had happened sooner. "I would have hoped that it had been done sooner," Bashir said. "There's an idea that she became white supremacist in 2017 after Charlottesville, but if you look at her articles, it goes back to 2015 when she's actually talking about white supremacist ideals like white genocide." So I think they mean ideas there, not ideals, but let's continue. Goldy failed in her bid to become Toronto's mayor in last year's mayoral race. Minister of Democratic Institutions Karina Gould said racist and violent views should not be tolerated on social media platforms. "There is no place in Canada for these kinds of divisive societal statements," she said. "We are pleased that Facebook has made this decision, and we would hope other platforms will look to Facebook actions." NDP MP Nathan Cullen called Facebook's move a one-off that targeted particularly hateful and high-profile groups and individuals. "We think that's progress, but it's inconsistent. Without any set of guidelines or rules, and we're allowing self-regulation," he said. "We're allowing Facebook and Google to decide when, where, and who." The Canadian Anti-Hate Network calls the targets of today's ban the tip of the iceberg. It said that groups which have made even worse comments remain on Facebook. "Next, we are calling on Facebook to remove the Yellow Vest Canada page, which shares hundreds of examples of overt racism, death threats, and white nationalist sentiment," reads a statement from Executive Director Evan Balgold. "We are still calling on the government to enforce the Canadian Human Rights Act against social media companies which are providing their services in a discriminatory manner." Asked whether they would be looking into banning other groups, such as Yellow Vest Canada, Facebook told CBC that work on determining whether posted online content violates the platform's policy on extremism is ongoing. Last month, the Liberal government announced a special fund for research into right-wing extremism. Through it, the University of Ontario Institute of Technology got a 3-year grant of $366,985,000 to conduct interviews with law enforcement, community anti-hate activists, and former and current extremists to gain a better understanding of the beliefs, motivation, and activities of extremists. The UK announced plans today to fine or block internet sites that fail to stop online hate, terrorist propaganda, or child abuse. Under the plan, a new watchdog will be appointed to establish a new regulatory regime to stop revenge pornography, hate crimes, harassment, and the sale of illegal goods, as well as harmful behavior such as cyberbullying and the spreading of fake news. Alright, so unfortunately due to our political climate, I have to add a bit of a disclaimer at this point. I am not a white separatist, nationalist, or supremacist, and I have always been a strident defender of Canada's multicultural project, which used to be called a mosaic in contrast to the United States' melting pot, but even that has become a little bit problematic. It also drives me a little bit crazy that I'm in the position of defending ideas and individuals that I in no way support and would likely get into a very heated discussion in real life if I was actually to meet them, but this is the world we find ourselves living in. To quote something that is often misattributed to Voltaire, but was actually written by his biographer Evelyn Beatrice Hall, "I may disagree with what you say, but will defend to the death your right to say it," and it saddens me how far away that sentiment seems from where we are today. One of the most troubling aspects of this episode is how the government has reacted. Let's take a quick look at what 2 of our members of cabinet have to say about this. First off, he looks like the fucking Joker with that suit and tie, but let's see what he says.
In the case of this particular individual, she was expelled from Rebel Media.
Like he pauses, like that's enough said.
She has a pretty clear track record of racist, anti-Semitic, and white supremacist messaging.
She's pro-Israel, so not
I don't
anti-Semitic,
think it takes
really.
a lot to figure out that you shouldn't be sharing a stage with that kind of individual.
He said
and it's
stage,
really
not
unfortunate
state.
that in this day and age, the leader of the official opposition did not find it a problem to share a stage with such an individual. This is real, folks, and it has real consequences, and hate speech may be academic for some people, but it has real consequences for minorities, for people who simply want to live their lives and who feel excluded by the kind of garbage that's out there being
If you don't
spewed
like
by
something,
these
don't
organizations and these
watch it.
individuals.
Don't
With,
look at it.
with regards to the platforms, each of the platforms have terms of service and community standards that very clearly outline what kind of behavior is acceptable on their platforms. Facebook is enforcing their terms of service, and that is what we welcome. These are platforms where people can and should be able to share their views, and we're not saying that that should not be the case. However, in Canada, when it
Kind of
comes
are.
to hate speech, when it comes to inciting violence, those are things that we don't accept out on the street corner. We shouldn't accept them on platforms either.
The individual they're referring to here is Faith Goldy, and Minister Gould is being dishonest when she compares the conduct that saw Goldy banned from Facebook with the existing hate speech laws in Canada. Now, for now at least, hate speech laws are fairly well articulated in Canadian law. Let's take a quick look. So as found on Wikipedia, these are the sections of the Canadian Criminal Code which deal with hate speech. Section 318 is fairly straightforward, advocating genocide is the most serious of the offenses. Section 319, publicly inciting hatred, and again, this is making an offense to communicate statements which incite hatred against an identifiable group which is likely to lead to a breach of the peace. And Section 319, Section 2, making it an offense to willfully promote hatred against an identifiable group by making statements other than in private conversation. And it does outline some defenses for the promotion of hatred. A person will not be convicted if a person establishes that the statements communicated were true. In good faith, the person expressed or attempted to establish by an argument an opinion on a religious subject or an opinion based on a belief of a religious text, and the statements were relevant to a subject of public interest, the discussion of which was for the public benefit, or on reasonable grounds the person believed them to be true. Or, finally, in good faith, the person intended to point out, for the purpose of removal, matters producing or tending to produce feelings of hatred towards an identifiable group in Canada. As far as I know, and based on all evidence I've seen, Faith Goldy is not guilty of hate speech as it is currently defined in Canadian law. From my view, in addition to being a provocateur of far-right opinions, she seems to have made two major mistakes which have branded her as a social pariah. Not offering enough pushback to neo-Nazis in her capacity as a journalist, which was viewed as providing them a platform and legitimizing their views, and reporting on demographic changes in North America and Europe in a way that legitimizes the theory of white genocide. She's a loud supporter of Israel, which calls into question Minister Hussein's assertion that she's an anti-Semitic, and it seems to me that if she was an actual white supremacist, she would have come out and admitted it by now. What else does she have to lose? Faith Goldy is becoming rapidly unpersoned. In the wake of Charlottesville, she was fired from her job at Canada's most right-wing news outlet, denounced by the mainstream media, and has since been banned from Patreon, Airbnb, and the PayPal network, and I'm sure that's not an exhaustive list. Another fact that makes me question whether Faith Goldy is a dangerous individual, as dangerous as the government and media is portraying her, is the fact that she received over 25,000 votes in the last mayoral race, in spite of all major outlets refusing to run her political ads and not being allowed to participate in the two major debates ahead of the election. While only representing 3.4% of the votes cast, this was enough to put her in a distant third place and far ahead of the fourth place candidate. I admit I could be wrong about Goldy, and if you have any evidence of her promoting hatred against an identifiable group, please link it in the comments below and I'll be sure to highlight it. However, even if Goldy and other groups and individuals targeted by Facebook are as bad as the government and media are making them out to be, as I've stated before and will likely state many times again, this isn't going to make the problem go away. There's a now tired analogy of putting someone away in jail for something minor and they come out a better criminal. If you're banning people from social media, there's a real potential to push them towards further radicalization, as there will always be communities of deplorable human beings ready to embrace the disenfranchised with open arms. To address the argument that Facebook is a private company and should be allowed to decide who they allow on their platforms, consider the following bit of hyperbole. Should a white supremacist have access to the internet? Should they have access to a cell phone? Should they have access to a bank account, housing, oil and gas to heat their home? I agree that free speech should have consequences, but at what point do these consequences become unbecoming of a civil society? It seems almost a moot point at this time to point out that all of this was exactly the stated intentions of the Christchurch shooter as he outlined in his manifesto. He specifically mentioned his desire for restrictive gun legislation to be passed and for increased censorship of the right of center in hopes of increasing the polarization within our societies. Another thing that's missing as part of the larger conversation is a path back to redemption if you are, indeed, too dangerous to be allowed on social media. As I discussed in a previous video, does it make sense that our criminal justice system attempts to rehabilitate people who commit the most horrible, violent crimes imaginable, but we can't see a path to redemption for someone like Faith Goldy? It just doesn't make any sense. Another issue that continually fails to be acknowledged in Canada is how to create a system of shared values out of such a disparate population. The lack of unification of values creates opportunities for discrimination on the basis of immutable characteristics, and it is a problem that the government of the day seems incapable of addressing. Canada is, by and large, a very peaceful, welcoming, and accepting society of newcomers from all walks of life. Because let's be honest here, if we can tolerate sharing a country with the French, we can tolerate sharing a country with just about anyone else. For those of you that are interested, there was some actual journalism in the form of an article published by Motherboard last summer on this topic, which I'll be linking in the description below. I encourage you to read it as it outlines the challenges tech companies face to provide us with the dystopia that we seem to be so insistently demanding upon. Alright, as always, thanks again for watching the video. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and if you want to see more content like this, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. Until next time, you have been watching The Golden Door.